How's everybody? Hello. I got some hecklers on the front. Awesome. So y'all here to talk about shame? Yeah? Are you here for extra credit, or do you really want to talk about shame? How many of you are here for extra credit? Awesome. That's all right. Are you here for extra credit? All right. Well, shame is a topic that nobody really wants to talk about, but I appreciate that you're here to talk about it tonight. I was talking to somebody the other day who was saying he's in a math class here, and he was talking to one of the math instructors, and the math instructor was saying, yeah, there's this guy, he's going to be doing this presentation on shame. He's going to talk about all this touchy-feely stuff. And that the student happened to be one of my friends. He's like, I know that guy. So shame isn't really something that people really want to talk about, but here we are tonight. We're going to talk about it. There's quite a few people who have introduced the topic of shame to me. John Bradshaw, who has been talking about shame for probably over 35 years, Marianne Williamson, and the rock star of shame, Brene Brown, who has had 3 TED Talks that talks about shame. And so the stuff that I'm going to be talking about today comes from some of the stuff that they've talked about along with my own personal experiences. So as we're going to be talking about shame, that might stir some stuff up inside of you. It might make you remember the time when Uncle Fester took you into the back and showed you his light bulb. And that might stir up some of your own emotions. So I'm hoping that as you are here and you do some self-care, if I touch on something that makes you feel pain or uncomfortable, that you'll do what you need to do to take care of yourself. That's not my intent to cause you to feel pain, but I might say something that touches on one of those wounds for you. So I hope that you can do some self-care as we're going along. So when you see this word on the screen, what other words would you associate with it? Happiness, love, no worries, tranquility, serenity. Yeah. How many of you have so much peace in your life that you have no more room for any more peace? Like you're full, can't have any more. These are some of these words you said. These are some of the other words that people have told me that they associate with peace. And whenever I show this to people, they're like, I want more of that in my life. I've never met a single person who said, yep, I am too happy. I have too much joy. I can't have any more of that in my life. So if you're one of those people, I'd like to know you and let you know that we all hate you. So peace is one side of a yin and yang, though. In order to have peace, we also have to experience something else. When we were born, we were happy until we needed a diaper change or needed some food, and then we would become grumpy and scream. But for the most part, we were innocent, we were joyful, we were beautiful. It was great, and we were just happy. We were what I call, when I'm talking with my clients, our inner child, our golden child. This beautiful, wonderful, innocent little being that hasn't experienced the world yet, hasn't been hurt by others, is just joyful. And when we see a little baby, we light up. When we see one and they're happy and they smile, we light up because there's energy that comes from these little ones. But unfortunately, something happens in our lives as we begin to move forward in our lives, as we begin to grow up. We get hurt. And so we have peace on one side, and then we get hurt on the other. And the thing is that we won't know what peace feels like unless we know what wounds feel like. We won't know what pain feels like unless we know what peace feels like. So we have to have both. As much as we want to get rid of that pain in our lives and say we don't want to feel it anymore, we have to have both. Otherwise, We just won't recognize that that's what we're having. So as we start, I want you to imagine that we live in a world, in this imaginary world, where as we start to grow up, we develop these wounds on our body. And so when we're a baby, we have no wounds. But everybody has this weird skin disorder that by the time we are 3 or 4 years old, we start to develop some of these wounds on our body. And they're really painful. And we don't want anybody to touch them. And then as we start to grow up, we begin to develop more of these wounds. And they are very painful. And some of them get infected. And by the time we're an adult, we are covered in these wounds. And they are really, really painful. And we try really hard to make sure that nobody gets anywhere near those wounds, because if they get near those wounds, it's going to hurt us. Until pretty soon we look like that. And we begin to do things that say, danger, stay back, don't get anywhere near me, because you might touch my wounds. You might hurt me. And I don't want you to hurt me, because these wounds already hurt on their own. And so if you come, we're like, don't come anywhere near me. I don't want you to touch me. And so I begin to put these barriers around me so that nobody will get anywhere near me, because it hurts so badly. Well, we live in a world like that. It's just that nobody sees these wounds. They're on the inside. But they're there, and all of us have them. And we don't want anyone to know that we have them, but we have them anyway. As human beings, we are wired for connection. That means that we are made to connect with other people. Physically, we're made to connect with other people. That's why men have penises and women have vaginas. We're made to connect. That's what I learned in Kindergarten Cop. Have you seen that show? I learned that in that show. So we're made to connect. In our brains, genetically, we are wired to connect. Neurologically, we're wired to connect with each other. We're supposed to have connections. We don't live on a world where there's 6 billion people so that we can be isolated and have these bubbles around us to keep people out. We're wired to be connected. But the problem is that when those connections that we make in our life end up breaking, then we break. And we end up experiencing a lot of pain. And I call these attachment wounds. When we have attachments to other people, and then something happens to those relationships in our life, it causes us a lot of pain. And so I'm going to go over some of the 6 genres of attachment wounds that I've discovered as I've been working with the clients in my work. And the first attachment wound is loss. And loss is when you have somebody in your life and then they pass away. You have a best friend and then they move across the country. You have your favorite pet and it gets killed in a car accident, it gets ran over. Loss is when you have these connections in your life and then they're not there. Nobody did them to you. It's not anybody was trying to be mean to you. It's just part of life. But if you had a connection with somebody and then they pass away, that causes us pain. How many of you have that wound in your life? All right. The second is neglect. This is what neglect looks like. I'm not talking about the CPS version of neglect. This is what neglect looks like in relationships. When you see that picture, what comes up for you? No contact, right? We're there, we're in the same room, but I'm not talking to you and you're not talking to me, but we're in the same room. So I'm not really getting my needs met by you and you're not really getting your needs met by me. We're just on our phones, disengaged, but we're in the same room. That's what neglect looks like. They're there, the person is there, but they're not really engaging with you. And that is a really painful wound for some people. It's a wound that says, I don't think that I'm important enough to you. We love that which we give time to. We love that which we give time to. And so if I have a neglect wound, that means that the other person loves something more than me. They love their cell phone more than me, which means that I am loved less. I'm not as important as that cell phone, that television show, that phone call, whatever. And so I'm not able to get my needs met because something is more important to that person than me. And that is a really painful wound. So as I go forward, I'm not going to raise my hand and ask you how many of you have that wound because maybe you don't want to share. But think about it for a minute. The next one, which is a really painful wound, all of these are painful in their own way. The next wound is rejection. And rejection is when you get a message from somebody that you're not okay. There's something wrong with you. I don't like you. You smell bad. You have cooties. I don't want to be with you. Get away from me. That is a very, very painful wound. Rejection happens a lot, especially in junior high school. That's where a lot of rejection takes place. In bullying, it can happen at home when one of your siblings says, I hate you. But rejection is a really painful wound as well. The next wound is abandonment. And abandonment is when somebody was in your life, you had a connection with them, and then they left without telling you that they were leaving. One day you're having this wonderful relationship with your friend, and the next day they're not talking to you anymore. And when you try to reach out to them to figure out why are they not talking to you anymore, they totally ignore you. And you have no idea why they're not talking to you anymore, but all of a sudden that relationship is cut off. Some really deep abandonment wounds that have had in my office are when a parent packs up their bags and moves away overnight. And the children don't even get to say goodbye. And they don't know what happened to their mom or their dad, why their mom or dad left. And they don't see them for years and years and years. That's a really damaging and painful wound for them. It's the abandonment wound. The next wound is betrayal. Betrayal is when you have a relationship with somebody that you trust, and then they do something to violate that trust. They lie to you, they cheat on you, they steal from you, they throw you under the bus, but they do something that violates that sense of trust in you, and so then you no longer can trust them. That connection that you had with them is broken. I had a client today who was talking about that wound because her sister opened her mail without her permission and was going through all of her phone records and going through all of her bills and then sharing that with other people in her life. That felt like betrayal. And she's like, I can't trust my sister anymore. That's a really big wound. When you have trust, especially when you're in a romantic relationship and then you find out that your loved one, your significant other, has been cheating on you, that's a huge and deep wound that happens. And the last of the 6 is abuse. And abuse is when somebody is taking their woundedness out on you. When they're inflicting pain physically, emotionally, or sexually on somebody else without their permission. Out of all of the wounds, this probably has the most serious consequences of the others, because this not only creates scars on the outside of your body, it can create scars on the inside as well. Abuse happens in all different areas of our life, and I guess if you look at it, abuse is all the other wounds combined. Rejection, abandonment, betrayal, all of those wounds combined into abuse. A really, really painful and catastrophic wound that takes years and years to heal sometimes. So I would ask you to lean over to your partner right now and say, okay, what wound do you have? But you probably don't want to do that, so I'm not going to make you do that. But maybe when you go home, you can figure out, okay, which wounds do I have? All of us have at least one of them. I think I've met like 2 people in my life who say, I don't have any wounds. And usually they're in denial. But so most people have at least one, and most people that I know have 2 or 3 of them. My biggest wound is abandonment and rejection. And those get stirred up all the time. And I don't like it when it happens. It causes us pain. So what happens is that when these wounds happen to us, we like to make sense out of them. We like to figure out why things happen. We're humans who like to figure out why. We're always asking, why is that happening? And so as a child, when these wounds start to happen, we try to figure out, well, why is this happening? But children don't have the cognitive ability to really figure out that it's because my parents are dysfunctional and they need some serious therapy. Children don't have the ability to figure that out. And so the only thing that they can do is turn it into themselves and say, well, there must be something wrong with me. And so they get these core messages, whether it's told to them by somebody else or whether they invent them inside of themselves that say, there's something wrong with me. When we get wounded, we get these messages that are tattooed onto our hearts. And then every time that wound happens, a wound gets rubbed, that message gets tattooed deeper and deeper into our hearts until we believe what she said to him, which is, you deserve to be punished. You know that, right? You deserve to be neglected. You deserve to be abandoned. You deserve to be abused. You know that, right? And because that message has been written over and over and over again, we go around believing that that's true. Those are core messages. So here's some different genres of core messages. The first genre is, I am not blank enough. So just filling it in. Fill in that blank. I am not what enough. Just say it out loud, everyone at once. I'm not what enough. Wow, y'all are shy. Say it louder. That's one of the core messages that some of us carry around with us, that I am not something enough. I'm not smart enough, good looking enough, buff enough, intelligent enough, rich enough, have enough good enough car. Or the other version of that is, I am too. Let's hear it. Too. Just say it out loud. No one's listening to you. Sensitive. Fat, skinny, ugly, clumsy, stupid, poor. How many of you know somebody who has one of those messages tattooed on their heart? Yeah? There's like 5 hands. 5 hands. All right. The second genre is, the world is not blank enough. The world is not kind enough, fair enough, safe enough, loving enough, accepting enough, or others. Or the world is too cruel, scary, ugly, crazy, judgmental, or others. So lean over to the person sitting next to you and tell me what one of the core messages that you've heard about the world is. The next genre is, others are blank than me, better than me, smarter than me, more powerful than me, richer than me, more worthy than me. Others are too judgmental, arrogant, intimidating, untrustworthy, undependable. How many of you have some of those messages that you carry around with you? Yeah, me too. I have some of those. Those are some pretty deep messages. They are connected to the wounds. So as you're going through your life, somebody may say or do something and they bump up against one of those wounds. They may bump up against that abandonment wound, or they may bump up against that rejection wound, and immediately, within a nanosecond, that core message has been activated. Even if you don't believe that it's true, in that minute, in that moment, it's been activated. And you probably don't even recognize that that's what just happened. It happened so fast. So you have a friend who is supposed to call you on the phone, and you're waiting and waiting and waiting for them to call, and then they never call. And then you text them, and they don't respond. Well, what wound does that stir up in some people? Rejection or neglect. And so immediately, that wound of, well, I must not be good enough. They don't like me anymore. Now, if you don't have that wound of neglect or rejection and your friend doesn't respond, there's no reaction. It's kind of like a sunburn. When you have a sunburn and somebody touches that sunburn, there's a reaction. And you want to pull away or you want to punch them in the face because that hurts. And you say, that hurts. But after a couple of weeks and they come along and they touch that same place where that sunburn was and that sunburn is healed, there's no reaction. So there's a reaction when there's a wound. And so as soon as you have that reaction, then some emotions show up. This happens really fast. And one of the emotions that shows up is anger. And anger comes from a sense that something is being taken away from me without my permission. I didn't say that whatever is happening to me is okay, and I'm really angry about that. Because something's being taken, my respect, my dignity, my ability to choose, something's being taken from me, and I did not give consent to that. And so it makes me really angry. The second emotion that shows up is fear. And fear is a sense that I'm going to lose something, and I have no power to stop it. Something's going to be taken from me, and I can't stop it. And it causes me to have this panicky feeling like the whole world's going to fall apart. And the last is sadness. And sadness comes when I've lost something and I can't get it back. And even if I do get it back, it's not going to be in the same way. So it's not going to be the way that it was before, and so I've lost it. So an attachment wound gets stirred up, rejection gets stirred up, my friend doesn't answer the phone, I immediately think that I'm not good enough, and then I get angry because I feel like my worthiness is being taken away from me. Now, if I don't have the rejection wound and he doesn't call, then I don't have any of that, and I'm still at peace. I'm okay. He must be busy. Must be something else going on. But if I notice that I begin to be angry or sad or afraid, that's a sign to me that a wound just got stirred up. And I get to be, if I want to, I can be curious and say, okay, what just happened to me? I notice I'm getting really, really angry right now. What just happened to me? What wound was that got stirred up? But we live in a world that says that it is not okay for you to be angry. Maybe somebody has said something like this to you about anger. There's nothing to be angry about. You can't be angry. Just deal with it. Don't get angry. You can't be angry. Don't take your anger to work. You just have to be polite all the time. How many of you have had somebody give you that message about anger before? So what are you supposed to do with anger then? You suppress it. Yeah, that's what we do, right? We just pretend. Okay? We also get messages about sadness. Sadness messages are like, there's nothing to be sad about. Don't cry. Big boys don't cry. Put on your big girl panties and stop crying. Stop your whining. I'll give you something to cry about. How many of you have had somebody in your life give you one of those messages before? So what are you supposed to do with sadness? Okay. We also get messages about fear. There's nothing to be afraid about. There's nothing to be sad about. There's nothing to be angry about. There's nothing. You're not supposed to have any of those feelings. There's nothing to be afraid of. Never let them see you sweat. You are overreacting. Don't be such a chicken. How many of you have had somebody give you one of those messages before? So what are you supposed to do with fear? What we do with it is we put a mask on. And we go out and we hang out with our friends and we put a mask on so that nobody knows that we're feeling angry and nobody knows that we're feeling afraid and nobody knows that we're feeling sad. We go to work and we put a mask on, we smile. We go to class and we put a mask on and we pretend that everything's okay. And that's that boundary thing. That's that big old sign that says don't get any closer that we start putting on ourselves. This mask to make everybody think that everything's okay when things aren't okay. We're hurting inside. And when we put that mask on, we are beginning to experience the fifth core emotion. And that core emotion is what we're here for tonight: shame. Brene Brown, who has studied shame for the last 15 years, has interviewed thousands and hundreds of thousands of people, gotten letters from people about shame. She has developed a definition of shame that I think is really appropriate. Shame is the intensely painful feeling and or experience of believing that we are flawed and therefore unworthy of love and belonging. Remember that core message? I'm not good enough, smart enough. It's the experience of having that wound getting stirred up and then believing that there must be something wrong with me. Believing that core message that's been tattooed on our heart. And shame is a thought and it's also an emotion. So I want you to lean over to the person sitting next to you and share with them what shame feels like for you. So what do you notice when I ask that question? What do you notice in the room? It got really quiet, didn't it? Got really quiet. People, I see a couple of people talking, they're whispering like this. Don't want to tell anybody. Well, here's the rules. Brene came up with 3 rules about shame. Number 1, we all have it. We all have shame because we all have wounds. So it's universal. It's one of the most primitive human emotions that we experience. The only people who don't have shame do not have the capacity to experience empathy. They're sociopaths. So, would you like to be a sociopath, or would you like to admit that you have shame? Second, nobody wants to talk about it, as you just noticed. It got very quiet. Nobody wants to talk about it. But the problem is that the less you talk about it, the more that you have of it. So rule number 3 is, if you don't want shame, then you got to talk about it. Because if you don't talk about it, then it just keeps building up inside of you. More and more and more. So I'm going to ask again, lean over to the person next to you and tell them what it feels like to feel shame. So let's define shame in a little bit of a different way. A lot of times people get shame and guilt confused. Guilt is a very healthy emotion. Guilt helps us to be able to make changes in our lives. Shame is a very destructive emotion. It makes us feel worth less. So let me define the difference between shame and guilt. Guilt says that I made a mistake. I feel bad that I made a mistake. Oh, I dinged your car. I feel really, really bad about that. Shame is, I am a mistake. Guilt is, I did something wrong. Shame is, I am wrong. Guilt is, I feel bad for what I did. Shame is, I am bad. Guilt is, I messed up, man. I am so sorry. I suck. So think back at the last time you felt guilt and think about the last time you felt shame. Do they feel different? How do they feel different? What's different about guilt? You don't know what guilt feels like. You only know what shame feels like. Thank you for being transparent. I really appreciate that. There are probably many people in this room that are just like you. They don't know what guilt feels like. Every experience that they have is a shameful experience, a shame-based experience, because they have deep tattoos on their hearts that say, there's really something wrong with me. Now, there's another emotion that we often confuse with shame, and that's embarrassment. Being picked last. What wound would that be? Rejection. So, if you don't have a rejection wound, then you probably feel embarrassed. Like, man, that really stinks. I know I'm really good. I'm a good player. Well, I'm embarrassed that I didn't get picked. But I don't walk home with my head held low. I'm like, dang, you just missed out on somebody who's a really awesome player. But if you have a rejection wound and you get picked last, what happens? Shame. That message again that I'm not good enough, there's something wrong with me. So embarrassment is a feeling that we all feel when something doesn't go the way that we want, but we know when we're feeling embarrassed that everybody has probably been picked last at least once in their life, and that's not the end of the world, and we move on. That's embarrassment. Everybody's experienced it. Somebody's come out with their zipper down. We've all done that. Shame is, I came out with my zipper down, and I suck. And I carry that around with me for the next 3 days, thinking everybody saw me and they all hate me. That's shame. There's another emotion that we sometimes get confused with shame, and that's humiliation. And Brene points out that the scary thing between humiliation and shame is that if you believe that you are worthy, then Matilda is probably going to go and tell somebody, can you believe what happened to me? It's not fair. Do you believe what my dad did? That's totally not okay. But if she's feeling shame, she's not going to tell anybody because she already believes that it's true. So what's news about that? She's not going to tell anybody that it's not fair, that it's not right. She's going to just say, yeah, here's more evidence. Here's more evidence that I'm not okay. Here's more evidence that there's something wrong with me. What happens is that as we begin to experience these wounds and these core messages show up in our lives and these core emotions of anger, fear, and sadness and shame show up in our lives, we begin to have these voices that show up in our heads. And no, you're not schizophrenic. These are these internal tapes that begin talking to us in our heads. And there's a party going on inside of there. I'm going to introduce you to who they are. The first one is the judge. And the judge is the voice that you hear in your head that tells you that you are not good enough. I can't believe that you did that. Why did you do that? Why are you dressed that way? You shouldn't be dressed like that. I can't believe that you said that. I can't believe that you talk like that. You should need to do something about the clothes. You need to do something about the way you look. I can't believe that you failed that test. You didn't study hard enough. You should have studied hard enough. I can't believe you didn't get a good grade on that paper. You didn't try hard enough. How many of you have one of those in your heads? A judge. The judge agrees with the core message that you're not whatever enough, but believes that you can change that if you are just perfect. So the judge is always trying to inspire you to be perfect. Problem is that we're never going to be perfect, so that's the dilemma with that. But the judge believes that if you are perfect enough, then you won't be rejected anymore. You won't be abandoned anymore. You won't be neglected anymore. You won't be abused anymore. You won't have any more loss. If you are perfect enough, then you will not be wounded anymore. So I'm going to beat you up and tell you that you're not good enough to inspire you to be good enough. Make sense? So you have one of those? How loud is your judge? Most people are like, really loud. It's really annoying. And thank you so much for introducing me to him or her tonight. I didn't even know that the judge existed, and now I hate him or her. I didn't realize that my judge has been hanging around with me since I was 8 years old. How in the heck do I shut him up? The second voice that shows up in our head is the hero. And the hero also agrees with the core message that there's something wrong with you, that you're not enough, but believes that you can change that message by saving the world, by proving to everybody that you're good enough because you are so kind and so sweet and serve everybody else. So if you can just make sure that everybody else is happy and you can make sure that everybody else is okay, then you'll be good enough. How many of you have one of those? Yeah. We just keep going. The next one is the victim. And the victim also agrees with the core message that you're not good enough. But he tells you, or she tells you, whatever gender of your victim you want it to be, tells you that there's nothing you can do about it. You are going to suck for the rest of your life, so you might as well just deal with it. People are going to be mean to you for the rest of your life, and you're just going to have to deal with it. You poor baby. How many of you have one of those? The next one I call the mat or the martyr. It's the doormat. And basically, it's just walk all over me. And this voice agrees with the core message that you're not good enough, but tries to reassure you by telling you that your needs are not as important as everybody else's, so it doesn't really matter. You're not important anyway. So just, it's okay. Just lie down here and let everybody else walk all over you. It's totally okay. You're going to be just fine. You'll be flattened out, but hey, they will be happier with you, with their lives. So there you go. How many of you have one of those? That's not as common for some people. The next one is the rebel. And the rebel agrees with the core message that there's something wrong with you, but says, screw the world, just do what you want to do, and it doesn't matter anyway. Who cares what other people feel? Who cares if it's going to hurt anybody else's feelings? You just do what you want, and you just enjoy life. Who cares? How many of you have one of those? By the way, people who struggle with addiction, this is the voice of their addiction. The rebel is the voice of the addiction that says, I have to act out, and it doesn't matter who it's going to hurt. It doesn't matter that it's going to hurt my kids, my wife, my husband, my friends. It doesn't matter that it's going to affect my job. I'm going to do it because it feels good. The last of the six is the princess, the royal, the prima donna. And this one is a little bit different than the other five. This one does not agree with the core message that you are bad enough, not good enough. And what it does is it tells you that you're better than everybody else. And therefore you are entitled to special treatment. What's the damage with this one? We hurt other people. This is how racism happens. This is how prejudice happens. Discrimination happens. Because we have this royal voice that says, I'm better than everybody else. That's how that happens. It comes from woundedness. It comes from pain. And it's a way of trying to deal with that pain by saying, I hurt, but I'm better than everybody else. So, how many of you have one of these? Notice there's not very many hands up because most people don't want to admit that they have one of these. It's also because we don't recognize this one. This one stays hidden for the most part. It comes out in special occasions. So it's harder to see this one than the others. The others are really loud and obnoxious. This one is subtle, but comes in certain situations. So then what happens is we got all that going on, and all of that feels really uncomfortable, and so we then want to numb it. Because I don't like how I feel. I don't like that I'm angry. I don't like that I'm sad. I don't like that I'm feeling shame. I don't like that this judge is talking to me in my ear all the time. I don't want to hear what it has to say. I don't like that my victim is telling me that there's nothing I can do about it, you poor baby. I don't want to feel any of that. So I'm just going to eat food to make it feel better. Or I'm going to look at porn to make it feel better. Or I'm going to go smoke a cigarette to make it feel better. Or I'm going to go to sleep to make it feel better. Or I'm going to play video games for hours and hours and hours until I feel better. I'm going to numb. There's thousands and thousands of ways that people numb. I'm going to shut down. But here's the problem. When you start to numb all that, you also numb something else. What? Peace. That thing that we all want more of. When you numb everything, including peace, happiness, joy, love. And so we have this core message that says, I'm not good enough, and I really want somebody to tell me that I'm good enough, so I'm going to go smoke a joint. I'm going to go shoot up. I'm going to do a line, and then I want my wife to say, hey, I really love you. Not going to work? We are experts at numbing in this world, especially in America. We are really experts at numbing. We are the most in-debt cohort that's ever existed, ever. The average American household has $11,000 in debt. We are the most obese. For the first time in the history of the planet, our children are going to die before their parents because their children are so unhealthy. We're the most medicated. We are most addicted. And then, because we've been doing all that numbing, instead of getting closer to peace, we begin feeling some contrary emotions to peace, including bitterness, more shame, hopeless, depressed, anxious. And that doesn't feel good, so we're going to numb some more. And it becomes this vicious cycle of numbing, feeling worse, numbing, feeling worse, numbing, feeling worse. How in the heck do we fix that? So I'm going to show you, you saw some pretty nasty wounds before, but I looked all over for not so gross wounds, because there's some really gross wounds. If you want something fun to do, go Google wounds and you can look at really nasty ones. But this person on this side, they have this really infected wound, and so what they have to do is they have to go to the doctor, and the doctor has to debride it, has to clean it out, has to either, and there's different ways to do it, get a scalpel and clean it off, or get water irrigation or whatever, but they have to clean it off. And then as they clean it off, then the wound can begin to heal. But the wound has become so calloused with all the scar tissue that it can't heal, and so it will stay there forever and ever. That's what we have to do with these wounds inside. We have to clean them out. We have to pull off all of the stuff that's been calloused on top of it, and we have to make the wound vulnerable so that it can actually heal. So Brene explained that vulnerability has three parts. First, uncertainty. I don't know what's going to happen, and I feel really uncomfortable with that. I don't know what's going to happen if I start to share with you what's going on inside of my life. I don't know what you're going to do. I don't know if you're going to reject me, you're going to abandon me. I don't know. I'm really not sure about that. So it's going to be risky for me to be vulnerable. I have to risk putting myself out there. I have to risk cleaning that wound out so that it can heal. And I'm going to have to risk sharing with you how I feel. And I don't know how you're going to react to that. That's vulnerability. Another way that she says it is that there are no guarantees. There are no guarantees that if you are vulnerable that it's going to have a positive outcome. But you have to show up anyway. You have to be vulnerable anyway and just show up anyway. And you have to allow yourself to be seen. You have to take the mask off and let people know that you got some wounds going on and that you're angry or you're sad or afraid. So I asked you to fill out some cards while you were out there. So I just want to read some of the things that you wrote about what vulnerability is. Vulnerability is when I'm fighting with my mom. Vulnerability is when you show weakness. Vulnerability, thank you. Vulnerability is when you're at your weakest point, when others take advantage of you. It can also be shameful of something. Vulnerability is when they know something about me that they shouldn't, and then they use it against me. Vulnerability is when I'm out of my comfort zone, people I don't know, if I have to speak in front of people. I know what that feels like. Vulnerability is when I feel exposed. Vulnerability is when you have to rely on someone else for your wants, needs, and happiness. Vulnerability is when you doubt yourself. Vulnerability is when you have no support or protection. Vulnerability is when someone is at their lowest point and it's easy for them to get hurt or easy for them to open up to others and tell them everything. Vulnerability is when you share who you truly are and what you truly feel. Vulnerability is when everything hidden is exposed and open for attack. Vulnerability is when I feel stupid for making a mistake. Vulnerability is when I'm unemployed and unfinancially fit. Vulnerability is when you let your guard down. Vulnerability is when we open ourselves to love and authentic connection. Vulnerability is when I'm in a situation outside of my routine. Vulnerability is when you accept your fears and struggles and share it with others. Vulnerability is when you don't know how much longer you will have a job. Vulnerability is when you feel broken and someone or something comes at you with a hammer. Vulnerability is when people know when I binge eat. Vulnerability is when you permit yourself to open up and risk getting hurt. So with the person sitting next to you, I want you to just share what your reactions are to what I just read. What were some of your reactions? Say that. A lot of pain. A lot of pain in those messages. Yeah. Any other reactions? Say that a little louder. You wanted to get out of your chair and go hide. It was stirring up some stuff inside of you. Yeah. I saw a lot of heads nodding as I was reading those. It touches our own core messages, our own core hurts that we have. And we can feel the pain in those messages. That tells me that you have empathy, which is really good. It's painful, but it's really good. So, in order to be vulnerable, we have this little kid inside of us. We have two parts of us. We have this outside part of us that feels insecure, feels needy, feels worried that people are going to see us. And that's the little kid part of us. The little kid part of us. If you take a look, does your shame self act like an adult? Or does your shame self act like a little kid? Does your shame self throw tantrums? Does your shame self go up and hide? Or does your shame self stand out there and let everybody see you? So we have to peel off the outside and let our inner self be seen, the adult self. The adult self. Now, I do this experiment with people and say, I want you to go find your little kid. That little kid inside of you, I want you to imagine that you're looking at a house and you're going through the house and you're trying to find your little kid. 90% of the time, the people say, my little kid, my little self is in a room by themselves, or they're in a closet hiding, but they're always by themselves, alone. And then I say, okay, where's the adult self? Where's the you that takes care of that little kid? I don't know. I can't find that person. I don't know where that person is. What that tells me is that the little kid, the shame self, has been running our life. And then we got these shadows that have been showing up, the judge, the victim, all of them, they've been showing up and they've been running our life. They've been hijacking our life. But we need to have this person running our life. The person who knows that I am worthy of love and belonging. And when I feel worthy of love and belonging, I make really good decisions. When I know that I'm worthy of love and belonging, I'm able to set boundaries really easily. And I don't let anybody walk all over me. But when I feel unworthy of love and belonging, I make really bad decisions. And I let people walk all over me. Brene says that vulnerability is our most accurate measure of courage. You want to know how courageous somebody is, see how vulnerable they are. Now, we think vulnerability is weakness. When we share something about ourselves to somebody else, we think that the other people are going to think that we're weak. But when we see somebody else share something vulnerable about them to us, we think they are the most amazing, courageous people ever. And we're like, that's so awesome. Thank you for sharing that with me. And so what we need to do is lean into the discomfort of being vulnerable. It is uncomfortable. It really is. To take off all the masks, to put the shadows away, and to let somebody just see you, that's really uncomfortable. But lean into it. It's going to be okay. You're not going to die. And as we do that, then we begin to change that core message. That core message that says, I'm not good enough. We begin to be vulnerable, and we begin to share with people, hey, I feel like a failure. I had a really bad day. And the person says, you're not a failure. Thank you for sharing that with me. I could really resonate with that. And all of a sudden you're like, maybe I'm not a failure. Maybe I am okay. So one of the ways to do that is by getting a piece of paper and drawing 4 columns down it. And you think about the last time that you felt shame, and then you describe the event, what actually happened. Then you put shadow in the next column, and then you put emotions in the next column, and then you put the truth in the last column. In the event, you just write down what happened as if you were a reporter. This is what happened. So-and-so said this, I said this, so-and-so said this, I said this. I was driving down the street, and a winter visitor pulled in front of me and almost knocked me off the side of the road. Event. Then you write down what the shadows say to you. Who says it? What does the judge say to you? What does the victim say to you? What does the prima donna say to you? What do they say to you? Who shows up in that event? And then, how do you feel? What emotions come up for you? Are you angry? Are you sad? Are you feeling shame? What would you rather be feeling? And you sit with that for a minute, and then you begin to tell the truth. What is the truth about the event that happened? What's the truth? Is the shadow telling the truth, or is your adult self going to tell the truth? What's the truth? And how are you going to respond? How are you going to behave from that truthful place? People who are willing to do the homework of sitting down and writing this out, they have some pretty amazing experiences. When they are willing to do that, they begin to really challenge the truth. They really begin to challenge the core message that I'm not good enough, smart enough, whatever. And the truth begins to show up in their life, and they're, wow, I really am good? I really am okay? I'm fine just the way that I am? And as we do that, we begin to change fear into faith. And I'm not necessarily talking from a religious perspective, although if you have a religious background, then you can incorporate that. But faith is a belief in something where you have no evidence to support it. And so when I'm afraid, what I'm not having is faith. Fear is the sense that something bad is going to happen to me and I can't stop it. Faith is something bad might happen to me and it's going to be okay. Something bad did happen to me and it's going to be okay. We also start to change sadness into hope. Sadness is the feeling that I've lost something and I can't get it back. Hope is the feeling that I've lost something and I'm going to get something even better back. I've lost something and it's going to be okay. And the last is anger. And anger is that sense that something's being taken from me without my permission. And we change that to love. That even though somebody might be trying to take something away from me, they can't take away my value. They can't take away my worth. And I have compassion for the fact that they're trying to take something away because they don't have enough of that in their own life. And I have empathy for that. And so when you have all three of those, that does some pretty amazing stuff to shame. It makes shame go away. The antidote to shame is empathy, which is all of that. That's why you go to a 12-step group and you tell them all your stuff. You tell them, hello, my name's Troy and I'm an alcoholic and I'm really embarrassed to be here because I think you're all going to judge me. And at the end, they come and they give you your phone number. They say, call me. Thank you for sharing your number with me. That's why that's so powerful, because I can relate to you and you can relate to me because you just shared with me your heart and I'm going to share with you my heart. And all of a sudden I get to feel what you're feeling and I love that. And I feel connected to you. We are wired for connection. And when those connections break, we break. So one of the ways to fix that is form new connections with healthy people. I'm going to listen to you. So we have people who've been wounded in all kinds of ways, and they begin to share their hurt with us, and we can have empathy for that. Because we can tap into our own wounds and say, I know what it feels like to be rejected. I know what it feels like to be abandoned. I know what it feels like to be hurt. I might not have experienced your wounds, but I know what my wounds feel like. And although I can't fix your wounds, I can't make them better, I can be here with you. I can sit with you. I can listen to you. I have compassion for you. And as I do that, I'm helping that person's wounds heal, and I'm also helping my wounds heal. One of the most comforting words that can be told when somebody shares something vulnerable is "me too." So we go back to these wounds, and we begin to heal those wounds. We take off that nasty stuff that we've been numbing, and we start to remove all of that, and we begin to heal that. And the more that we begin to heal that, the more peace that we have. And when that happens, addictions stop, relationships improve, our creativity increases, and we set better boundaries when we're in that peaceful place. So it's really vulnerable to turn in a paper to your professor. It's really vulnerable because they're going to judge you, right? They're going to give you a grade, an A, a B, an F. It's really vulnerable. But when you're able to lean into that and you share your paper with your whole heart, chances are you're going to get a better grade because you were vulnerable. I teach the intimate relations class, and part of that class is journaling. And I can tell the people who are willing to lean into the discomfort because they'll write a whole page or something about themselves. And I can tell the people that are centered in shame because they give me a little paragraph. That doesn't really say anything about what's going on. I give better grades to the people who are willing to share their experiences because they're being vulnerable. And I write little messages to the ones who are not and say, you got to try again. I need you to be vulnerable. Marianne Williamson said this, and it comes from a book, I Return to Love. Our deepest fear is not that we are inadequate. Our deepest fear is that we are powerful beyond measure. It is our light, not our darkness, that most frightens us. We ask ourselves, who am I to be brilliant, gorgeous, talented, fabulous? Actually, who are you not to be? Your playing small does not serve the world. There is nothing enlightened about shrinking so that other people won't feel insecure around you. We are all meant to shine as children do. And as we let our own light shine, we unconsciously give other people permission to do the same. As we are liberated from our own fear, our presence automatically liberates others. In other words, as I'm willing to be vulnerable, I give other people the permission to be vulnerable too. And then we're able to listen and create and make the world a better place. Thank you. So we have, they asked if I wanted to do a question and answer. So right now, if there's anybody who wants to ask a question, they can be vulnerable and come up here and ask the question. And if not, then we'll just stand here in awkward silence for a little while. But does anybody have a question? So you asked, what's the first step to healing? The first step is to identify that you've been numbing. That's the first step. Just like in 12 steps. Identify that you've been numbing, and then to become curious about what it is that what are you really numbing? What are those wounds that you've been numbing this whole time that you maybe didn't want to take a look at?
So does that bring you back to events that happened to you in childhood that you never dealt with?
Yes, she asked, does that bring you back to events in childhood that maybe you have suppressed? And absolutely it does. And so the first emotion that begins to show up with that is fear. I'm really afraid to go back there and revisit that stuff. I've been suppressing that for 20 years. Why do I want to go back and look at that? But that's the healing process. We begin to cut that away and we begin to look at that stuff. And yeah, it's going to be scary, but it's also courageous to do that. So the question was journaling any certain topics. One of the best journaling exercises is the one that I just showed you. Write down what happened, what are the stories that are showing up in your life, what are the emotions, and then what's the truth about that. But just journaling in and of itself is a really healing experience. It doesn't have to be formatted. You can just start writing and taking a look at what's showing up for you. Any others? Yes. Do I do private counseling? Yes, and I have cards and stuff back there that you could get. And I also have other therapists in my office that do that with me too. Any others? Well, thank you for spending the evening with me and sacrificing your time to be with me. I hope it was beneficial. And I hope that you all can lean into the discomfort and be a little bit more vulnerable in your lives. So I wish you well. Thank you very much.